So anyway, but yeah, I'm super stoked. That's today and tomorrow, so I'll be at that. I'll be taking part in the NIH ultrasound neuromodulation event. So if you are interested, check me out on Twitter, and you can see the link to register there. So cool. All right, so let's jump into it. So welcome. We're going to be talking about the role of the vagus nerve in respiratory health today. We'll be talking about some of the insights, the connections between your breath and your vagus nerve, and how that all works. Yeah, so it'll be fun. And as is always, it's going to be a journey through. Wow, I didn't know that was true. That's pretty fascinating. But before we do that, we're going to do our simultaneous squeeze. So let me timestamp this. So we do what is it? We do 5 minutes 30 Valsalva. Okay, good. So you know the drill for the Valsalva squeeze, the simultaneous squeeze. We're going to take a deep breath in through our nose, through our mouth actually. Then you're going to take a sip of air at the top. You're going to hold that in and squeeze it. You're going to bear down with your stomach, your diaphragm, and your chest and your lungs, and squeeze it really hard for 5 seconds. Then you're going to slowly exhale out of your mouth, just like that, okay? Ready? So let's do it officially in 3, 2, 1. Breathe in. Sip of air at the top. Breathe in and hold. And squeeze. And slowly exhale. Very good. Okay, and that's it. So, interesting effect I just got there was I will admit, I have certainly had my fair share of breathing experiences and also hallucinogens, right? I'm from Ashland, Oregon, okay? I lived in Berkeley, California for all of my 20s, basically. So, yes, I've dabbled. Now, if you do that breathing practice just right, you can literally induce a momentary glimpse of the hallucinatory state if you do it right. It's very fascinating. There's a lot about breath that is totally unexplored. It's why it's interesting when I see people going, the new breakthrough in mental health is going to be psychedelics, and we got to get a bunch of people taking magic mushrooms. And I'm like, really though? Like, breath, never have I ever had a doctor say, Sterling, let's take a couple deep breaths right now. Never happened to me. Has it happened to you? Hasn't happened to me. So anyway, let's go into this. So let's go into the vagus nerve and the connection that it has with breathing and respiratory function, your lungs, basically. And, just as a little aside, at the end of the video, we will talk about the connection between COVID damage to the vagus nerve and respiratory distress. So if that is a condition that you've developed, seriously stick around, because you're going to learn a lot. And we're also going to talk about some actual treatment options that you can pursue if that is a concern that you have. So very, very, very important. So the vagus nerve, known as the pneumogastric nerve, is one of the longest and most important nerves in our entire body. It plays a crucial role in regulating many bodily functions, including our respiratory health. So in this video today, we're going to dive into how the vagus nerve itself influences our breathing and its impact on overall well-being, as well as how breathing itself can influence the vagus nerve and vice versa. So super, super important. Nod your head if you are a breather. If you're one of those people out there who is breathing to stay alive, then go, that's me. So pretty up your alley, I hope. Unless you're one of those aliens from Mexico, and gosh, God knows what they are doing for breathing. I mean, they don't even have lungs in those pictures. I mean, come on. Totally a scam, totally a hoax. But anyway, so let's understand the vagus nerve first. So as is usual, I always want to cover, just because this could be their very first video they ever see. The vagus nerve serves as a vital communication pathway between the brain and various organs, including your lungs and your heart and your digestive tract and your stomach and your liver and your spleen and your pancreas. It consists of both sensory and motor fibers. That means your vagus nerve can detect things going on in your body, and as well, it can influence motor function in the actual body. So that means partially in terms of your diaphragm, so your ability to breathe in and out can be regulated by your vagus nerve. So since it consists of sensory and motor fibers, this means it doesn't only receive information, it's also going to send instructions to different parts of your body. It's going to send information from your brain down through your vagus nerve into your body, telling certain processes to either start or stop or hold. That is a big piece of what the vagus nerve is doing. That's why vagus nerve health is so important, because you can imagine if you're trying to run a body and you have no communication, how's that going to work, right? So one of the sensory functions of the vagus nerve is detecting lung fullness. So one of the key aspects here is its function in the respiratory pathway. So your vagus nerve can detect if your lungs are full. So if you do take that big deep breath in, and you can feel that pressure in the lungs, that is literally a sensation of your vagus nerve. So that's a good test you could do right now if you're watching. If you're watching right now live or replay, just don't be driving a car or anything, but just take a deep breath in. And if you can feel any pressure, motor pressure, chest pressure, a pressure in your throat area, your trachea, that would indicate, if you can feel that you still have function in your vagus nerve. Now, if you don't feel any sensory awareness there, that is a problem. That's a indication could be early detection of what's going to develop later on, which could be really, really severe. You should very much take that very seriously. So the nerve contains specialized receptors. These are typically called piezoreceptors that monitor the expansion and the contraction of the lungs during breathing. Just as much as I can feel my fingers rubbing against each other, those are sensors on my fingertips, part of my sympathetic nervous system and my nociceptive system. Your vagus nerve has fingers all throughout your body, including your lungs. So these receptors, when they're activated by increased expansion of the lungs, they send signals up the vagus nerve into the brain, and this allows us to perceive the sensation of fullness or emptiness in our lungs. So this is why breath work, is considered a way to stimulate your vagus nerve. It'd be like, consider it like this. Genius metaphor. Now, I'm not a big fan of thinking in terms of metaphors, but let's say that there's a nerve that runs from your left index finger tip. And there's a nerve that runs from the finger all the way through your arm and up into your brain. Okay? And let's say that I wanted to stimulate that specific nerve. And I said, well, if you want to stimulate that nerve, you should rub your fingertip. Because when you rub your fingertip, the sensation feels like it's happening in your finger, but really your brain is actually receiving signals. You know how this works. Signals are being sent up your finger, up your arm, past your elbow, up your shoulder, into your spinal column, and then into your brain, into the opposite side of your motor cortex, and your brain is registering that you felt something, okay? So I'm actually not just stimulating my fingertip, I'm activating a long nerve network that runs into my brain. So that would be considered nerve stimulation in the arm. Now, it's the same thing with the vagus nerve. So technically, if you want to stimulate your vagus nerve, if you take a big deep breath in and you trigger those receptors of the vagus nerve that are in your lung that feel the sensation of pressure of full lungs, then those signals are naturally going up into your brain, and that's registering as fullness of your lungs. Do you guys see how that works? You see how that works in terms of breathing technically does stimulate your vagus nerve, but it's usually not in the way that you think. So type yes in the chat if you guys do understand that there's a complex mechanism. When you feel a sensation in your body, It's not because the sensation is happening in your fingertip. It's because the sensation is sending electrical signals into your brain, and your brain is where the sensations are actually being experienced. Your brain just localizes it as if it's happening in your fingertip. You guys get that? Okay, good. Yes, good. So when people say, oh, no, breathing is a great way to stimulate your vagus nerve. Breathing is a fantastic way to stimulate your vagus nerve. What they're really saying is, oh, the best way to stimulate your arm nerves is to tickle your fingertip, right? Now, that works as long as the receptors in your fingertip work, correct? And that there's no damage to the nerve that runs through your arm, correct? Yeah. So if I'm saying that if I rub a nail on my left fingertip of my index finger and I can feel the sensation that I'm stimulating the nerve, the non-vagus nerve that runs up my arm into my brain, that works as long as the vagus nerve wasn't damaged by COVID, wasn't damaged by pharmaceuticals, wasn't damaged by chronic stress that you never addressed. If the vagus nerve itself doesn't work, then breathing won't work. Just as much as if I had a surgical accident and it cut the nerve in my upper arm, I can scratch my fingertip as much as I want. No amount of touching my fingertip is going to have a sensation. You lose sensation. Everybody here has in your body, I'm sure, either in your feet or your hands or somewhere in your body or your ear or your part of your face, decreased nerve sensation, correct? Right? Even I have some of it. I had a car accident years ago, and my left pinky doesn't feel as much as my right pinky. But it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with my brain. The area is specifically in the disc region in C6, C7 in my neck. That's the issue, which is why I make a big point all the time about keeping your neck health up, because your vagus nerve also runs right through this area. So if I can develop neuropathy of my finger, my pinky, and my ring finger because of an injury to the nerve in my neck, then could you not also develop breathing issues, digestive issues? Could you develop pancreatic insulin resistance from a problem in your neck? Could you develop depression from a pinched nerve in your neck called the vagus nerve? The answer is probably what you're thinking. Hell yes, you can. Absolutely. It's very common. But compression of the vagus nerve from neck distortions or neck cervical instability is not the only way that this happens. You can damage it through all kinds of ways. You could be eating ultra-processed foods. You could be drinking alcohol, which is known to damage the vagus nerve. Are you a drinker? Maybe consider not doing that, because I can tell you that you don't want to live a life where you've damaged your vagus nerve for any more than 3 years. If you haven't developed a severe chronic health issue within 3 years of a continuous onslaught against your vagus nerve, then you're really lucky and the time is ticking and you need to turn around immediately. There is no going back once that threshold has been crossed. So quit. I know we're talking about respiratory health, but quit drinking if you can. If this message is getting to you, stop drinking alcohol. Okay? If you can. All right. So next part on the agenda here is we are going to be talking about vagus nerve dysfunction and respiratory issues. What does this look like when this issue develops? So when the vagus nerve does not function properly, it does not function optimally, it can result in various respiratory problems. Individuals with vagus nerve dysfunction may struggle to take deep breaths. They may experience difficulty even sensing that they are breathing in the first place. They might have to maintain conscious awareness of breathing actively just to be able to breathe. Where if they are concerned that they fall asleep, that they are afraid that they'll stop breathing in their sleep and die. So this can develop into something that is pretty severe. Would you agree? I mean, it seems like this is pretty scary. And so feeling that you have a lack of lung fullness, like really lacking the sensation of any feeling when you breathe in, is a problem. So this kind of dysfunction can also lead to inadequate blood oxygenation. This can lead to impaired brain function because you're not getting enough oxygen in your red blood cells to go to your brain. These are all processes that are downstream of first and foremost a vagus nerve issue. And for those, again, who are wondering, I'm not saying that the only way you can get a damaged vagus nerve is from cervical instability, but it is certainly a very common way that it happens. There are lots of ways. There are many what we call vectors of attack that the vagus nerve can get impaired. So be mindful of all those things. Again, if you don't have awareness of a vector of dysfunction, then you are at risk for that developing into a pathological disorder and then into a chronic disease. This can even lead to this inability to breathe and detect your breath through vagus nerve dysfunction, and respiratory situations can also lead to increased inflammation, body-wide inflammation. Inflammation, I can't even get into this right now. That's a whole different video. What are the downstream effects of increased inflammation in your body? They are severe and substantial. They are going to destroy your quality of life. So if you right now notice, it doesn't feel like I can breathe very well. Could there be something going on there? Should I take that seriously now? Yes, you should. Literally, like there's a whole separate 5-part video series that I could do just on what increased levels of inflammation can do to wreak havoc on the entire body. So, and then as I mentioned as well, difficulties during sleep, difficulties of breathing for sleeping time can also lead to sleep apnea, waking from sleep, gasping for breath, having to go on an oxygen CPAP machine. There are a lot of really bad side effects that can happen from a damaged vagus nerve. Vagus nerve dysfunction can bite you literally in the ass. Well, not literally, but you get what I'm trying to say. That would be funny if the vagus nerve flew out of your body and bit you on the actual ass. That would be the literal. I'm misusing the word in literal here, and I apologize for the grammar, whats. So interestingly, let's talk about the relationship with digestion as well, because what you typically see going alongside respiratory failure as a result of vagus nerve dysfunction is issues with digestion as well, because those same nerves that travel down the esophagus, the vagus nerves that travel down the esophagus that branch off to the lungs, also right there in that same diaphragmatic intersection, branch down into your stomach. So then again, if you have issues with breathing, then you might also notice that, gosh, you know what? When I think about it, I can eat a ton of food, but I don't feel fullness at all. I can drink so much, and my body isn't receiving, my brain isn't getting the signals from my stomach. And it's the exact same thing. There are vagus nerve receptors that feel sensation of stretching and expansion of the stomach when it's filled with food and water. And those signals go up the vagus nerve into your brain. And then your brain should say, okay, let's eat less. We're full now. We can stop eating. But if your vagus nerve is not working, then those signals don't make it. So technically, right, if we're going to be a little bit cheeky here, which if you get to know me, you'll notice that I can at times be sarcastic and cheeky like this. But just as those breathwork practitioners who will tell you time and time again that oh, no, we don't need any of these interventions that are talked about on the internet. No, breathwork, honey, just breathe. If you just did breathing, breathing can stimulate your vagus nerve, right? Not if your vagus nerve is damaged at the level of your neck, then no amount of breathing can actually stimulate the neurons to get those signals to your brain. So technically, breathing isn't always a good method to stimulate your vagus nerve. If your vagus nerve is damaged, it can't work. You got me? Right? But the same thing could apply. Let's say that, so gosh, there are people who sell their services on Facebook, for instance, who are breathwork coaches or somatic therapy coaches. And they say, oh, we're going to fix you. We're going to treat chronic illnesses, and we're going to teach you deep diaphragmatic breathing practices. These are very healing. They're samsaric, deep Buddhist, Indian spiritual practices where we do nostril breathing, right? But if your vagus nerve doesn't work, that's not going to work. But you could just as easily, because the method by which they're stimulating your vagus nerve is by stretching and expanding the lungs to stimulate the receptors, the piezoreceptors in your lung tissue, to then send signals up your vagus nerve. But you could just as well say the same thing with not a breath work practitioner, but an eating work practitioner. So you can breathe or you can eat. Okay? And eating a ton, doesn't that stretch your stomach? And anytime you stretch areas where there's the vagus nerve, the receptors activate, right? So you could be, guys, if you guys are looking for a great business opportunity, I think you are going to kick ass. Go into the market of promising people the moon by claiming that you're going to stimulate their vagus nerve by having them eat a ton of food. Just gorge yourself on as much dang food as you can stuff down your face. Okay? Now, technically speaking, binge eating is a form of vagus nerve stimulation because you are expanding the stomach receptors, right? So just like breath work takes advantage of that stretching of the lungs to stimulate your vagus nerve. Now, however, if your vagus nerve is damaged anywhere in the neck from COVID, from cervical instability, from chronic stress, from environmental toxicity, there's lots of reasons why your vagus nerve can get messed up. But if your vagus nerve is messed up, then no amount of you eating food or breathing deep will ever stimulate the vagus nerve. It just won't work. That's when you need to start doing interventions that are different than that, okay? So we oftentimes do see dysfunction in digestion as a result of vagus nerve dysfunction. So take that as an indication of something that you should take very seriously. Something that should not be overlooked, okay? So speaking of overlooking, let's talk about overcoming. So addressing vagus nerve dysfunction, generally speaking, particularly when it comes to respiratory health, can indeed be challenging. While online practices such as breath work or vagus nerve reset techniques or nervous system resets can sometimes provide relief to some individuals with an intact vagal network, oftentimes people with severe dysfunction will require more direct interventions. More direct interventions are going to be things that directly stimulate your vagus nerve, VNS. Handheld vagus nerve stimulation devices are typically, that is the next tier of what you do need to pursue in these kinds of situations. So for those who are suffering from significant vagus nerve, dysfunction, incorporating VNS with technology into their daily regimen and the routine can offer substantial relief to some of these problems. No joke, right? And I've actually worked with people who have a spectrum on both ends where they don't feel the sensation of breathing, then they stimulate their vagus nerve, and they all of a sudden have this, it's like an air hunger. Like they want to walk outside and just go, it's like they weren't breathing deeply before. And so stimulating the vagus nerve wakes up this network where their body knows that they need oxygen. That's another part of your vagus nerve too, is just that if your vagus nerve doesn't work, there are chemoreceptors that can detect how much CO2 is in your blood. And if you have a buildup of CO2 and too little oxygen, that should typically be something your vagus nerve tells you. But if your vagus nerve is damaged, as we've talked about in many different kinds of ways that can happen, then you don't even know the consequences of not breathing and you're walking around with depleted blood oxygenation, you're causing brain damage at this point in time, right? You can't function with 81% blood oxygen on a day-to-day basis to any large degree, more than just sitting around. So, you can start to see where I would start to take it seriously. If you can't breathe, you can't feel digestion, you can't feel full when you eat a lot of food, that is a pathological disorder that needs to be treated more seriously. So for those who are suffering these kinds of dysfunctions, VNS can involve the use of specific devices that do stimulate the vagus nerve, which can help to restore its proper functioning, of course. This targeted approach can alleviate respiratory issues. This can improve oxygenation, reduce inflammation, and enhance overall well-being. Generally speaking, what we found is that people who do incorporate VNS, generally speaking, feel a lot better overall. And you can see why, given how many things are going through your vagus nerve, right? If this is the very first video you've ever watched of me, I encourage you to watch at least one more video, because the more you start to kind of get this picture of how the vagus nerve is all interrelated, you'll be like, holy cow. Like you'll start to see the bigger picture emerge. Yeah. And I see your comment here, Barb. Yeah. You have air hunger, you're suffering. Yeah, absolutely. So you probably need to take your VNS game up a level, right? Every type of dysfunction has a degree of dysfunction. So more things need to be done, but this is categorically, this is an issue of the vagus nerve. If you're having these kinds of respiratory issues, it's not another thing, right? There are other nerves involved, but the vagus nerve does play a substantial role in the cognitive, logical, computational network of your ability to breathe and exhale and know if you have air or not in your body. So in conclusion, in recognizing the vital role played by the vagus nerve in respiratory health, we can see and understand how dysfunction in the vagus nerve can manifest as breathing difficulties, right? So, and other related symptoms. And it is crucial to understand that network relationship to explore some effective treatments. So if you yourself are experiencing this degree of dysfunction, of lack of sensation, then you should consider vagus nerve stimulation as part of your daily regimen and routine. And I'm not talking about YouTube videos that talk about vagus nerve reset practices, which are wildly popular, but they work for people who have an intact vagus nerve. The audience that I generally like to speak to are people who have some bigger pain points than just, oh, I wasn't feeling so great today. I did some breathing and I feel fantastic. If that kind of stuff isn't working for you, then let me be a guide into the domain of vagus nerve stimulation, right? It is a medical treatment. So entering into this space, you certainly want to do this properly. It's not a Hall of Mirrors fun candy land here. I mean, we are talking about literally altering your neurology with technology. So that must be taken with a degree of seriousness and professionalism, which you're not going to get by just haphazardly doing, strapping a TENS unit onto your neck because you saw somebody on a Facebook group recommend it. So this kind of stuff does need to be taken seriously. Okay. So yeah, vagus nerve stimulation used daily and successfully may provide the relief that you are seeking. Take control of your respiratory health and embrace the benefits offered by stimulating the vagus nerve. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to end it here on YouTube and Twitter. See you guys soon. Take good care of yourselves. Do what's right, okay? Do the right thing. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye. And then for